It's time for me to make another sword, but this time I decided, I want to be famous, and making a YouTube channel will definitely lead to that, right? Anyway, I already sketched and planned out the sword, deciding to go with some creepier vibes for when I painted it. I also made a 2-scale drawing, then started and finished the wire core of it. I start to build up the sword's shape with paper and traced a 2-scale drawing to get the right shape. I need to cut out 2 pieces of the same paper, so I very lightly glue the layers of paper together so they don't move while I cut it out and I can just peel them apart. I need to glue the pieces of paper onto the wire core, so, using a toothpick, I mix together water and glue in about a 1:1 ratio. I keep messing with the ratio of it, not thinking it's close enough to what I needed, and when I'm finally finished I brush it on. However, it wasn't what I needed, and the mixture has too much water in it. The paper doesn't stick well enough to the wire and to the paper on the other side because it's basically just wet paper at this point. Since it's not really sticking, I try to keep brushing on more of the water and glue mixture and pushing it down until it starts to stick. After a while of doing this, it eventually actually starts to work. Done with the first layer of paper at that part of the blade, I then move down towards the handle and start to glue on that part. The process I have to go through for this part is the exact same, but I still hadn't added any more glue to the mixture, so the pain and suffering that I have to go through in this is also the same. I cut out a copy of the crossguard to glue that on, continuing to build up the base layer of the sword. However, the crossguard will end up being mostly made out of cardboard, so the base layer of paper serves as something to glue cardboard onto instead of something that I'll actually be building up. And then I finally realized that I should add more glue into the mixture and continued to glue on the crossguard and then went back and re-glued on some of the things that I had already done and continued to glue on the crossguard. I start again by using the brush, but the paper was already too wet and some of the smaller areas were harder to reach, so I used the glue bottle. After finishing and making sure everything is glued together well, I move on to fixing the rest of the sword where things weren't glued on properly. Eventually I'll glue cardboard onto the handle so it has a good diameter, but for now I glue a bunch of paper onto it so the cardboard can get a good stick. I use a bunch of glue and smush it into the gaps in the wires. Now, you may be wondering, Mega, if it's a short, one-handed sword, then why is the handle so long? You see, yes. Anyways, I already cut out the pieces of thin cereal box cardboard into shapes where there is no wire. If I just cut it out into one large piece in the shape I wanted, then there would be a bump where the wire is underneath. One side of the cardboard is smooth, so I also had that sanded down so the glue sticks better. I work on one half of the handle by gluing down the pieces. Wait, is that in the shape of an AirPod? Well, after I glue down the AirPod, I mean those pieces of cardboard, I start on the next layer up. Now the cardboard is the same thickness as the wire. Due to a change of plans, I ended up cutting the next layer in half, even though I glued the 2 pieces on at the same time. The outermost layer of the crossguard is at a thickness I like, so I built up the next part inwards with some thicker cardboard from a shipping box. There's a small dip near the center of the crossguard, so I glue a piece of cardboard there, then replicate everything onto the other half of the crossguard off camera. I never actually glued the paper onto the pommel, which isn't very pommel shaped, but I'm going to call it that anyways, so I do that, this time completely forgoing the brush and just using the glue bottle. The small piece of wire I didn't glue anything onto will become a small stick that connects to the diamond to the rest of the pommel, since I can't just have it floating because, laws of physics. I continue to build up the crossguard, resuming at the place where I didn't glue anything last time. I glue on multiple layers of the thick cardboard to give it the depth I want it to have, and glue on the 2 sides individually because the handle is in the way. Then, I glue on a thin layer of cardboard onto part of the crossguard to finish off that layer, and then I get annoyed because there isn't much glue left in the bottle and I have to try and get to the nozzle and squeeze it a bunch, and it's annoying. On the blade of the sword, there's a difference in depth between the thick group of wires and the thin paper edge of the sword. In order to make the difference in depth smoother, I glue thin pieces of cardboard to the blade. I trim it to make sure it isn't too wide, then sand it so the smooth side of the cardboard can stick to the glue. I trace that piece for the other side instead of immediately gluing it on. I trim this new piece since the other side is slightly different because I'm not perfect at gluing and cutting things. I don't bother to sand the new one I cut out because I'm lazy, and because the smooth side is up instead of down. I glue the other pieces down, then go towards the tip of the blade to work on that part. In order to get the right shape, I trace the edge of the blade, then draw a line inside of that to where I think the outermost part of the cardboard should be, then sketch another line inside of that where I think the edge of the wire is for the innermost part of the cardboard. After cutting it out, it's not perfect and I need to trim it down a bit more, but the technique works alright. There's a small section without any cardboard, so I cut out a small piece to fill that in. I then move on to the last portion of the blade, continuing the same process. This time when I cut the piece out, it ended up being too straight, so instead I have to make it gay. I had to bend it slightly into a more curved shape, and you can see the little bent lines from that. I use a paper towel to wipe up the extra glue that gets pushed out. There isn't much space next to part of the bump thing, so I don't add any cardboard there, and go farther up the blade. And I'm still very low on glue. I finished gluing the thin strips of cardboard onto the blade, so next I glue diamonds onto the bumps to make them thicker, and start to create depth in the proper shape of the low spot. I plan to glue eyes into the low spot later on. Now that more stuff has been glued to the blade and you can see the difference in height between the little layers of cardboard, I glue on another layer of paper to help smooth it out more. There's a bit of paper hanging over the low spot, so I use a popsicle stick and some glue to push that where it's supposed to go and glue it down. On the blade, you can still see the changes in depth between the wires and the pieces of cardboard. I think that it could end up looking cool, although there is a dip on this side of the blade that I don't like, so I cut out and put some small pieces of thin cardboard there to fill in the gap. I just sketched what I thought I'd need, then trimmed it a bit more. Wait a second, is that a new glue bottle? No more Mega complaining about empty glue bottle? Anyways, I used this newfound power to glue it on and wipe up the extra glue with a paper towel, then add another layer of diamonds for some more depth. I line it up to see if it fits how I want it to, then trim it when it doesn't. The back side gets sanded cause, at this point it's so the glue can stick to the smooth side. When I finish gluing on the second one, I move back towards the handle to glue on an extra decorative bit. I used a thicker cardboard to get the depth I want and lay it next to the 2-scale drawing to make sure I line it up correctly when I glue it down. The next part of the decorative bit has a lot of wire in the way, so I trace where I think I need to cut it out. I remove almost all of the center and gradually trim down the edges more and more until it fits properly. I slap down some glue and fiddle with the positioning of it until it's good and I can glue down the next layer. I move back to the crossguard and finish building that up. I glue together a thin layer and a thick layer of cardboard into the shape I think I need, although it's way too long and I have to cut it down. I use the thin cardboard on top of the thicker corrugated cardboard so that the corrugated pattern doesn't show through. I did not do this for the details on the blade though. I move to the pommel, starting at the diamond. I take pieces of cardboard in the same shape as the diamond and cut off pieces of them to avoid the wire that's in the way. I glue down the tiny bit at the tip, then go on to the sides next to the wire. After doing the same thing on the other side, I repeat the same process for the other part of the pommel, which I have no clue what to call, so let's go with arm things. The wire here forms a weird, organic sort of shape. I have to be careful with the really thin tip at the end to make sure it actually gets glued down. The part on the inside of the wire is smaller, so when I cut out the piece of cardboard it ended up being too large. I gradually trim it down. I don't know, it kinda looks like a weird insect leg or something. After that, I glue down a piece of thin cardboard to cap it off, making sure to leave a gap where the wires are really thick near the handle. A lot of glue ended up getting pushed out of the sides. I then cut out a thin strip of paper to glue around the stick connecting the diamond to the arm things to get rid of the 2 wires next to each other shape, and because paint doesn't stick well to the wire. I then cap off the diamond and cut out some trapezoids to add another layer of depth to the pommel. I once again cut out a small section to avoid the thick group of wires. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but my nails are really long and I cut them so now they're short. I then glue on the piece of cardboard to cap off that part of the pommel, then move on to the handle to make it thicker. I cut out a rectangle of cardboard, which I roll around the pencil so it's already kind of rolled into the correct shape. I trim a bit off the end since it was too wide and fiddle with how it's rolled up. Gluing it on ended up being difficult, but I start by adding some glue to the end. Before waiting for it to dry, I add some more glue and roll that, but the first part I glued didn't stick so I had to push that down, though by now the part I pushed down was covered in glue, so I ended up getting glue everywhere. I finished rolling it and gluing it, so I tightly wrapped it in a bunch of masking tape. I kind of expected this to happen when I unwrapped the tape, and when I did, the tape ripped up much of the top layer of the cardboard. The excess glue likely caused the tape to glue itself to the cardboard. It doesn't matter though, because I'm going to sand the cardboard anyways to get rid of the change in depth caused by the end of the roll. It ripped up a lot of loose fibers, so to cover up that texture, I cut out some strips of paper to wrap around the handle. I do this very lazily because I was planning to add more paper at some point, since I like to do some kind of handle wrap which I paint before putting on for my swords generally. I didn't really get any paper at the ends of the handle, so I wrapped some more paper around there so it's all nice and covered. I also try holding it in both hands in front of the camera. Because there's lots of edges to the cardboard and you can see all the layers, I covered all in a layer of paper. Anyway, there isn't a lot to say about this part, so just take a moment to enjoy the rest of this part of the time lapse. When I finish covering that in paper, I do the same thing for the crossguard off camera, then go back to the blade to cover up the exposed cardboard with some paper. I was originally going to cut out a diamond, but then changed my mind and have it cover that portion of the blade. When I cut out the little hole for the low spot, I make the hole too small so when I glue down the paper, I can push down that paper so it covers the inside edges of the low spot. I do the same thing for the other bump, then use the extra glue to sort of paint the blade. This is so that when I sand it, I'm sanding glue instead of the straight up paper because sanding paper rips up the fibers and makes it rough. The glue also keeps the fibers held together on the surface so it's harder for them to be ripped up. I get the sandpaper and start with 400 grit to sand down changes in height formed by cut paper that I glued down and wrinkles in the paper. Doing all the sanding made the edge of it sharper, and it was actually able to cut into an eraser before I painted it. Sanding takes a long time, and when I finally finish with 400 grit, I move on to 600. The 600 grit is to make it all really smooth and to give all of it an even texture, so this time I go over the entire sword. Because this is the part where I sanded near the edge of the blade, this would have been what made it sharp, but I needed something to say when talking about the 400. Now that all of it has been sanded, I'm ready to paint it. Part 2 will be out in probably about a week, but who knows, I have a bad work ethic. There will be a third part as well, although it will be shorter because I'm just going to finish up some stuff in that video. Anyway, congratulations to make it to the end. This would be where I ask you to subscribe and like the video, so do that. Or else. Anyway, have a great day and try not to stab yourself on accident.